Later on the show today, I'm going to tell you that I believe the left is losing the so-called battle of ideas. But before we can even have that conversation, we should go over the details of the multiple mass shootings that took place this weekend with countless casualties carried out once again by people, at least in one case, inspired by the ideology that underlies support for Donald Trump and which, in fact, Donald Trump himself has been fomenting. And then also a mass shooting carried out by an apparent pro LGBT rights, anti Trump leftist. So, yes, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. One of the shooting incidents this weekend was by an apparent leftist, but we will talk about the degree to which we can say their ideology inspired the actual violence. This is a really important thing to understand. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take it piece by piece. Let's go through the sick details. Now, before we even do that, just to be clear, it's a foregone conclusion that all of today's show is going to be demonetized for us on YouTube and other platforms because these are the stories that are not considered brand safe. So we're going to earn no money on most of today's stories because we're covering what took place over the weekend. So consider leaving a tip, so to speak. Become a member at joinpakman.com because everything we're talking about today, even tangentially related to these shootings, is going to be demonetized. So let's start with El Paso. Donald Trump has been doing everything from threatening Sweden to release A$AP Rocky, an American rapper, to encouraging violence at his rallies by saying he'll pay the legal fees of people who get arrested for roughing up protesters. He's repeated the xenophobic language about immigrants, particularly brown-skinned ones of all types from S-hole countries, in contrast to people from Norway, who are the people we should want coming to the United States. And it is all now coming to a head with a weekend that includes a mass shooting where at least one shooter specifically claimed that ideology as his inspiration. The first shooting, 11 a.m. on Saturday. Shooter walks into El Paso, Texas Walmart, starts shooting. Around 20 killed, a ton injured. We're still trying to figure out the exact numbers. A 4-month-old baby was killed. The suspect was captured and not killed in this particular case. We have both a post from the shooter on 8chan, an online hub for extremism and racism and white supremacy, and we have the shooter's manifesto. And I know you probably are not surprised to hear this, but it was yet another one of these anti-immigrant radicals who was pushed towards white supremacy, wrote that he agrees with the Christchurch shooter's manifesto, another anti-immigrant xenophobic screed. The manifesto is essentially an amalgamation of the exact xenophobic ideas that have been pushed by Donald Trump and the people around him. A Hispanic invasion of the U.S. and of Texas is something we need to be afraid of. White people are being replaced by foreigners, the great replacement theory or idea or conspiracy theory. The shooter didn't like race mixing, and it said, the manifesto about immigrants, that, quote, if we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can be more sustainable. It says he was inspired by the same white supremacist anti-immigrant ideology that the Christchurch, New Zealand shooter was inspired by. And the El Paso shooter actually mentioned the Christchurch shooter in the manifesto. News organizations have identified a Twitter account, since taken down, appearing to be the suspects, which includes the build the wall hashtag stuff, a picture using guns to spell out the word Trump, as well as posts from a right-wing conspiracy theorist who happens not to like me, named Paul Joseph Watson, known for his association with Alex Jones. So in some cases, these domestic terrorists, and that's what they are, and that's what we should call them, if we care about facts and feelings, that is, sometimes these domestic terrorists literally have a vehicle covered in Trump stuff, like that MAGA bomber who sent pipe bombs to Democrats. Sometimes it's simply the endpoint of stochastic terrorism and radicalization that starts with sometimes as high as the president of the United States and the White House and the rhetoric that we see there. Now, there's a very specific element from the manifesto that Trumpists are pointing to in order to defend Trump, which is that the shooter says his ideas predate Donald Trump. Trump didn't give him these ideas. And this is super interesting. They say, the Trumpists say, this vindicates Donald Trump. This is not a vindication of Trump. This is an indictment of Trump. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I've said all along Donald Trump hasn't so much radicalized people. He's emboldened and coalesced and inspired the radicals to become more active, to be more public, and to take action around this ideology. This El Paso shooter, just like many others, already held most of these anti-immigrant, xenophobic, Hispanic invasion, great replacement ideas before Donald Trump. What Donald Trump's presidency did is, number one, gave them solidarity. As Richard Spencer told me himself, this is a president that is as close to what they want as they are getting, and who is saying this is the time to do your stuff if there was any time to do it. So number one, Trump gave them solidarity. And number two, Trump made them much more willing to go public with their ideas. And then third, Trump escalated their fear that this stuff was happening and ultimately has inspired them to take action through that mechanism called stochastic terrorism that I've talked about before. The argument for me was never that Trump is radicalizing people who otherwise didn't hold any of these beliefs. It's that Trump has created an environment where the radicals become much more willing to do things in the real world. And we're seeing it every week, month. I mean, I don't know. It depends how you want to categorize it. They're not creating the radicals. They're turning the radicals into actual domestic terrorists by emboldening them and legitimizing their hate ideologies. Now, 13 hours later, in Dayton, Ohio, another mass shooting. Again, we're still getting numbers. Seems like 9 or 10 people killed, around 25 injured. Those numbers may increase in a nightclub by someone that we now believe to be a leftist politically. This suspect was killed by police. The suspect was using a .223 high-capacity gun, had additional magazines with him, was wearing body armor. And in this one, media is making a big deal of how heroic police killed the shooter so quickly, like within a minute or a couple of minutes. Now, that might sound like a win. They're touting that as a win. And of course, it's good to stop someone who is actively trying to kill people before they kill more people. But consider that what this means is that in just 1 minute, the shooter was able to kill 9 people and injure 26, or whatever the exact numbers are. The shooter never should have had firearms that would have let him kill 9 people and injure 26 in 1 minute. That's what we need to be understanding when we hear about the police neutralized him after a minute. Since the shooting, it's been reported that the shooter described himself on social media as he, him, anime fan, metalhead, leftist. I'm going to hell and I'm not coming back. He tweeted that he would vote for Elizabeth Warren in 2020. He tweeted that he was upset about Trump winning in 2016. He said, quote, "I want socialism and I'll not wait for the idiots to finally come around to understanding." He is believed to have been a registered Democrat and has tweeted in favor of gun control and gun safety regulations. Okay, so let's now go through something really important. Here we have a right-wing shooter and a left-wing shooter. And there are elements of the right that, even though we know that the overwhelming majority of political violence is right-wing, they are seizing on this weekend of a right-wing shooter and a left-wing shooter and trying to equate and say, we just have violence from both sides and it's bad and let's work together. I want to be really careful here, but there's a really important distinction that has to be made. Right now, it is abundantly clear that the motivation of the right-wing shooter in El Paso was his right-wing beliefs. Specifically, he left a manifesto. He went to a particular place that is at the center of this battle around the issues around which he was radicalized: immigration and Hispanic people, etc. An anti-immigrant guy worried about a white invasion drives hours to El Paso to do this and leaves a manifesto telling us what radicalized him. We simply don't know whether left-wing beliefs actually inspired the Dayton, Ohio shooter. There is currently no evidence of that. So believe me, this is not a show where I sugarcoat stuff. If we have terrorism from Muslim radicalization, I tell you that. When we have terrorism from these militia types, I tell you that. What we know now is that the Dayton shooter appears to have had leftist politics. We have no evidence that those beliefs are what inspired the shooting. We have no evidence at this point that that political orientation was the reason for the shooting in Dayton, Ohio. As soon as we get that evidence, if we do, I will be right here telling you, but that is not the information that we currently have as of this taping. And it is really important that we not allow the rightists to say these shootings are equivalent in that you had right-wing beliefs inspire a shooting and left-wing beliefs inspire a shooting. Unless we know that the Dayton, Ohio shooting was politically motivated violence, we should not say that it was, and some already are. So that now this is going to get us to, I believe it is time for the left to realize that we are losing the battle of ideas in a very disturbing and specific way. To talk to people about this in a serious way, we have to address this issue. We talk jokingly or satirically about the marketplace of ideas and the battle of ideas, but there is a really concerning and specific way in which we are losing the battle of ideas, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about next.